And we've got it arranged in slightly different ways on different bubbles and different bubble diagrams, but that's the story.
And I think for reference, Jan facilitated us sessions 3 to 4, 5 years ago. And so this story really came out of that early work setting. What are the story? What's the sort of scale? What's some conceptual ideas on exhibits? But I think to emphasize again what Bill was saying, that story really drives the development of any of these site plans and any building form and function. And you will see that these same bubbles occur in all the alternatives and then also in the recommended plan. The second alternative, we gave the name McKenzie Mortgage, and the idea here was that we were going to have a building conceptually inspired by the forms of a McKenzie River drift boat. It was going to be a singular building as opposed to the 3 buildings that was in the first alternative, and we located it down on the lower terrace. And what you can see then is that we located it on the edge of the historic district. The parking and the access drive are down in the lower apex of the triangle. We did suggest moving the entry drive 150 or 200 feet further to the east to accommodate that building. And also, at this time, there were conversations about if we needed additional turn lane capacity to make the left turn.
And this gets right at why you all went to ODOT. And ODOT was very pleased that they were consulted early, which is number one. Do it early, and they had no problem with the modifications to the highway.
I think I didn't mention this on alternative 1, but all of the 4 alternatives, we also looked at what we call a series of loop interpretive trails. So there would be like the 15, 20-minute visit. There might be the hour visit. There might be a half-day visit. So you see emanating from each of these alternatives, there's a loop trail around the historic district. There's a loop trail up the bluff and back around. There's an additional loop that takes you up to the water diversion on Hatchery Creek. And then on a number of these alternatives, we recognize either personally or just sort of human nature, we all like to get to the summit. So there's a trail up to the summit of the ridge and even ideas about taking a zip line back down again. So each of these then would also play into that same main interpretive messages that Jan had developed. And they would have stops or waysides associated with site features that help tell the story, either of the McKenzie River Valley, fish, and drift boats. And
these, what we always do is we do a loop, and it allows people to choose the amount of time they're going to spend on site and their capability for walking or hiking. Some people just want to stay on the flatland, some people want to go up a little bit, and then some people want to go to the top.
One of the things we recognized, and I think we had some conversations, that right now the 4 historic buildings, 3 are unoccupied, 1 is a caretaker's residence, but they are generally deteriorating over time. They haven't been really occupied in the case of the chamber building since the late 90s. The hatchery building and the barn really haven't been used or occupied since the replacement fish hatchery was relocated as part of the Leaburg Lake and dam. So it's important for us to start thinking about were there uses that we could put these buildings back to and thereby maintain and keep them from deteriorating and going away. And so it's very small print here, but we started thinking about using the garage as a boat building demonstration area. We thought about the hatchery building as a place for drift boat storage, or it could even function potentially as a demonstration hatchery itself. So that also occurs in each of these 4 alternatives and plays also into the review that we had with SHPO.
So yeah, and so we've got a bubble diagram again. In this case, you can see they've been kind of consolidated. And again, we start out with lobby and welcoming, the changing exhibits. The River Theater then goes into the historic McKenzie River Trail, Tamilage Lab, the drift boat story, the heritage guides, gear, fish ecology, and in this case then there are views from there over the pond. And then we use some of those historic buildings as boat building demonstrations and open boat storage and things like that. So it's basically that same bubble diagram again, reconfigured in order to match with the site that has been chosen.
And if you notice that as a singular building, one of the advantages of this from a visitor experience and storyline perspective, this allows that to be a continuous, close-in experience. The other alternative, and a couple of the other alternatives, the story was spread in separate buildings. So that was also a way of thinking about how could we configure these uses on the site, and what were the advantages or disadvantages of each one. The third alternative we called Leaburg Landing, and this was the test, a phrase that we discovered after the workshop that was written into the National Historic Register, which was no new buildings within the district boundaries. And having worked on a number of historic district projects, we found that unusual, that kind of a statement. And so, in the process of unearthing ideas, we said, well, we're here to explore as many ways to think about this project as possible. So in this case, our approach was to run counter to that statement in the register, and we proposed adding 3 structures, similar in the way the story was divided in the alternative 1, and to create more of a campus feel that used the existing buildings, added these 3 buildings, and framed the view both towards the hatchery pond, but also the view back out towards the river. And then similar to the previous alternative, you can see that we moved the entry drive, and the parking component generally occupies that apex of the triangle. And this then generated one of the key recommendations at the end of that 3-day workshop is we need to go visit with the folks in Salem at the SHPO office. And so we'll hold you in suspense as to the outcome of that meeting. But as Steve introduced, it was all very positive.
So again, we have a bubble diagram. In this case, it kind of bifurcates. We start with the lobby, the McKenzie River historic trails on this side, the River Theater is on this side, Tamilage Lab, and these have been cited because of the needs of the space and of the historic buildings. Drift boat exhibits over here. There's basically a center courtyard from which all of these go out, and I'm not going to spend too much time on this because, in fact, you know the story. Wasn't really acceptable.
And then the last one, I think, just based upon not necessarily Portico designing a building like this, but seeing lots of historic districts around the country, and that idea of building a new building that isn't trying to copy or replicate history, but to do something that's complementary in its use. And so really the focus of this alternative was to use that center space that was formed by the existing buildings and to put the 30,000 square foot building program essentially as a glass cube that would reflect the historic buildings in its facade, and from the outside, looking in, you would see the facades of the existing buildings, but from the inside you would then have the interpretive component. We were excited about this, and actually it was surprising, sort of the excitement that the 12 people who came to that day really thought this had a lot of potential.
And again, we have, starting with the lobby, we have the River Theater, the historic trail, Tamilage Lab, the drift boat exhibits, fish ecology. This all worked very well, except that it put a big box right in the middle of the historic district that we have now been told cannot be added to. So that's there were many of us who really liked this idea, but it would have just kind of blown up the historic district, which is not acceptable to anyone.
So that was where we left that meeting, and as Steve said, that there were two questions that were raised that we felt we needed to get answers to. One was the question of, as we go from a group-admitted, sleepy former Chamber of Commerce wayside with very few visitors per day to what was projected by the University of Oregon's community planning workshop that did a feasibility study looking at attendance and costs and revenues, as they projected kind of in the middle sweet spot that this would be a 35,000 visitor a year museum. And in comparison, a project that Portico designed, actually it was all four of us, Jan, Bill, Mike, and I. The Oregon Trail Center in Baker City was about a 20,000 square foot visitor center, and they have leveled out to a 35,000 visitor a year sort of level. So the idea was that the feasibility study thought that would be on a sustainable level, kind of a middle of the road attendance target. It might be higher, it might be lower, but that was the planning parameters. So we went to ODOT with that question because people raised a concern, was there enough capacity in the eastbound left turn lane, particularly on a weekend summer day, to have a safe in and out crossing. There's also a right turn deceleration lane out there for westbound traffic. And then the other question that was raised, I think by Christy, as we presented alternative 3 and 4, but she said, but doesn't the historic register designation have restrictions on building there? So we went to Salem on the 30th of November and had two really remarkable meetings. And I think part of the positive response we received was that normally people finish 100% contract documents or working drawings, do all their work for 1 or 2 years, come to the agencies and say, we did a great job, can you give us a permit really quick? And never consider alternatives or never consider issues that might arise. So both of the agency groups were very complimentary to the Friends group for setting up that meeting, and I guess we're complimentary for our planning group here who suggested we touch base with both of these groups. And the summary of that meeting relative to the highway with the ODOT officials is that there are 2 existing driveway access permits. One is for the service drive on the very west edge of the property. The other is the public entrance. And those 2 permits are valid for a long time or maybe into perpetuity. The second element was that at the attendance level we're projecting, even if we looked at 50 to 100,000 visitors a year, the existing turn lanes were designed with that in mind. And so if we do not move the driveway, all we need to do is essentially kind of a process element of presenting our plans to them at the time we're ready to start construction to get a permit. Very little issues. And some state highways, ODOT has access control, which means they can dictate where and how many driveways you might have on a road frontage. In this case, they have no access rights control, and that as a landowner, Lane County could put a driveway anywhere they want along the street frontage. So we knew that in 3 of the alternatives that we showed to them that we were suggesting moving the driveway, and we wanted to make sure that wasn't a major hurdle. And the answer was no. What they suggested was is to do a traffic count, and we actually contracted with Access Engineering, which is a Eugene-based transportation planner who came to the meeting and did some research with us. And they they would set out, the typical counters, the black cable you see stretched across roadways occasionally. They would count a summer weekend day, and they would use that information just to verify that yes, we do have capacity. And then the third element, we would have, if we moved that access road to the east, we would have to add on pavement to move the right-hand turn lane also towards the east. But none of those were seen as obstacles because there's existing permits, and because, in fact, we went early. They were more than happy to write a memorandum of support to the Friends Group and to Lane County, saying that there were no potential issues with this project. So we left that meeting, went and had a hamburger, and went on to SHPO to see how that was going to turn out. And before going to that meeting, Mike and I contacted one of our former college professors, Don Peeting, who was at one time the assistant dean in the architecture school. But more importantly for your project, he was the head of the historic preservation program for many decades. And he retired 10 years ago, and upon his retirement, he became one of the governor's appointed State Historic Preservation Commissioners, and knows all the staff, and in fact, all the staff are mostly his graduates. So they had meetings where he presented kind of what our intentions were, and everyone looked at the historic preservation register description before we went to Salem. And what they shared with us, both on a personal opinion as a professional, but also as commissioners and staff, is that no one in SHPO had ever seen a register application that had that restriction. That is not the approach or philosophy that the National Park Service or individual state SHPO offices take, and that in fact they doubted whether it had any legal standing. So that was good information to hear, and in fact Don Peeting suggested, depending on the outcome of our planning project and our preferences or recommended plan, that he suggested actually rewriting and resubmitting the application as part of this planning and design process. It was interesting that they wanted to emphasize to us that there is a formal federal and state process of review, and that review actually does happen when we have completed documents and plans. And so their opinions now are more advisory, but the summary of what they said to us was staff generally favored alternative 2 and 3, so they didn't have a problem with building in the district. In fact, Don Peeting favored alternative 4, but he said, this is a staff decision at this point, and I'm here as an advisory role. But they said that one of the main elements they wanted us to consider was that the scale of those existing buildings are 900 to 1,100 square feet, and they were concerned in alternative 2, which was the one larger building. Just they wanted to make sure that either there was a separation between the district buildings and that building, and screening, which saving the large grove of existing Douglas fir trees accomplished that. They said that it was very important, the idea of the views out to the river, and they really did support the idea that components of this project, finding adaptive reuse of those 4 structures, was a way to save the buildings. Because their number 1 goal is to save that district and buildings as a reflection and history of the state of Oregon, and many, many sites never find a use, and I think someone characterized it that eventually they fall down and become sawdust and move away. So they were very encouraging for this planning process and this sort of client group to think about reusing those buildings in addition to building a new one. At the end of that meeting, the staff actually had some very good criteria, and they said, we are not going to choose an alternative for you. The proponent, the county and the Friends Group, should propose what they want. you could pick any of the 4 alternatives. And our process is to talk about mitigation and scale and style and review. But they suggested that we might think about a few key design criteria to go along with maybe a more intuitive or arbitrary choice of saying, I like that one or I like this alternative. And so we took that with some of their suggestions on criteria, and we fleshed out a few, and I'm not going to read all of them, but under site, one of the key things were we all recognized that this was really a marvelous natural setting and a historic district setting, and anything we did and do should recognize that quality, and what we propose should complement that. We talked about a carrying capacity of the site and the feeling that, certainly in the case of the parking lots, we had a feeling that we were starting to really jam that site to its capacity and fill it up, and we wanted some breathing room so people could still experience those more natural qualities of the site. And we wanted to preserve the Douglas fir grouping and that allée. Some of the building criteria, it really got down to this idea of appropriate scale and how do we relate to these really sort of miniature residential scale buildings and a proposed program of 30,000 square feet. The idea of touching lightly on the land and thinking about that relationship between a building and the historic district. And I think one of the things, a great thing that was said at the SHPO meeting was, we do not support copying 100-year-old building styles and confusing the visitors that this new building is an historic building. What they want is something that's complementary but not copying. And I thought that was a great piece of advice in thinking about how do you then propose a new use in and adjacent to an historic district.
And there's one reference there, which is make subtle reference to the lines of the McKenzie River boat in the building forms, and you're going to see that coming up.
Yeah, and so I think we talked a lot, particularly with Don Peeting, who's both a practicing architect and a historian, about, don't be too literal with that. Use it as inspiration and abstract it, but don't make a building that looks like a drift boat. It's kind of his advice. So really, I guess we're now about an hour into this, but we do want to then focus on now where we went with that feedback and that design criteria, the input that the board gave to us about some of their preferences, and show you where we went with that. And we have some writings that we will provide that describe each of these elements. And so we've looked at this from the perspective of the interpretive story, the site story, and the architecture of building story. And the working title that we developed was that this was the Museum on the Meander, the McKenzie River Discovery Park. And there's a couple of really significant design ideas or gestures that really guide this plan. And number one was the idea that, we're all sort of amateur geomorphologists, but looking and reading the landscape, those hatchery ponds and this low area at the base of the bluff, in all likelihood was a historic river meander or bend in the McKenzie River. Some of that's been lost over time by vegetation, but so our gesture was to take that wetland low area that's on the base of the hill and create both a metaphorical but literal river meander form that crosses the site and ties into those 3 existing hatchery ponds out near Highway 126, and use that to think about landscape character, but also to think about how the visitor center then becomes part of that meander.
Dennis, I'm just remembering back to our meeting in October. This was Gordon Grant's major recommendation.
Yeah.
That we restore water to the site.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the advantage, Gordon is a geomorphologist, and I think as landscape architects, we study that in school, and Jan is very interested in that as a storyline. So we saw that meander as a way of encompassing all 3 components of the interpretive program, from the river and the watershed, its history and formation, the boats and the people and the fish, and all that became the organizing idea for this diagram.
And one of the things that we do as we design is, and especially designing buildings, we try to take those cues from the site and the understood site elements and have the building fit into that and be part of that story as opposed to being in opposition to it.
So this is showing the context of the whole 45 acres. The next image, we're going to zoom in on a series of scales. But so I want to just...
That's the same drawing that's up on the wall.
To sort of summarize, the river meander was the big idea.
This is this coming through here like this.
And then the building siding, you can see that we have a couple building schemes, but the building is located on that meander. You can see that this piece of the building intrudes into the district boundaries with SHPO's blessing. But what we've done is we've outlined off of some of the survey information that was actually in that historic register document, and we're retaining all of the grove of existing Douglas fir. And in fact, this red arrow, if you remember that slide in the fog in our walk.
That photo was taken through right from there, looking down that alley.
So the
that's
building,
a really
the
critical
building
element.
lobby, everything is oriented to that alley as a way of entering the historic district. I wanted to point out then, like the other diagrams, we have a loop trail in the district, a loop trail up to the bluff top, up to the hatchery diversion, and then the trail up to the summit.
With the zip line down.
Yes, and maybe a chairlift. And then the last thing I wanted to point out that is we did look at parking. We reduced the size and scale in response to that design criteria about the carrying capacity of the site. We were showing in those earlier alternatives more parking than what was required for a 35 to 50,000 visitor a year, and we had some confirmation of that with our transportation planner, Mike Weischer. So you can see the proposal now is we have moved the driveway 200 feet to the east, and then we have a parking lot for 60 cars and 9 trailer RV stalls. And the reason we did that is you can now sort of see as we move the building footprint further away from the historic district, the existing drive would be entering right into the building, and that just didn't work.
Dennis, I was also going to, the idea of the drift boat inspired building form, I think we all remember Tom Ripp made that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that, I mean,
It's really great.
so I'm going to zoom in there just so you can see, and this sort of shows you that drift boat
You can see
inspired
the
form.
kind of outline of it, and the drawings are more or less show that form, but in fact, it gets cut into in various locations, and you'll see that as we get into the architecture.
I think that, you know, just thinking about circulation too, just Jan wanted us to mention this, that if people arrive at this site and the building isn't open, either seasonally or before or after hours, it was important that people have the ability to get to the district and not have to go through the building. And so thinking about those loop trails, the entry here, there's a sweeping drive up, a circulation around, and a drop-off plaza. And then the darker red lines represent trail systems, so one could walk around the edge of the building if it is closed. This is that loop around the hatchery buildings, and we're proposing a boardwalk that goes over the meander pond and wetlands. So that's essentially that's the 15-minute loop, and then there is kind of the half an hour to an hour loop. So we're showing, if you remember our sidewalk, this is the relatively steep service drive we walked up. This length from here to here and from here up to here is at an accessible grade to get up that 40 feet. And the hope is that then from here you have kind of those territorial views out to the river, and then the context to the other site trails.
And that issue of accessibility is really important for every institution these days, especially. And if you look at the the plan on the wall, you can see we even have an accessible trail all the way up to the top. It's pretty wild.
Well, this is not accessible.
That's not accessible.
Yeah, that's at a 20% grade, so that's like going on a mountain hike. But these loops, the loop here, the loop here, the loop up here,
Yeah.
and up to the meadow, all those are at, the standard is a 5% grade, which is the American with Disabilities Act standard. So now, just
So
talk about the buildings.
yeah, so you saw the earlier bubble diagrams, and they were diagrammatic. They didn't take into consideration the needed sizes of the spaces. And what we did was we sat down with Jan. Jan was integral to making this plan and understanding this. And we determined what the sizes of those spaces needed to be in order to fulfill your programmatic needs. And you look, and again, this is a bubble diagram. This isn't a building. And in fact, even the building drawings that you'll see are diagrammatic. They're not buildings quite yet. But what we always do is we take the program elements that we've created, and you've heard, we've gone through those, and I'll go through those again with this diagram. And we've taken those and made those bubbles to scale, so that we know how big that space needs to be. If a room needs to be 30 by 40, 1,200 square feet, then we have a bubble that corresponds to each of those spaces and the designated size in the program in order to fit in the exhibitry or other functions that go on in that space. So we can look at the bubble diagram again. What we've done is that this is that critical alignment through the building. We turn this orthogonally so that it's more understandable, and you'll see it tilted on the site when we get to those drawings. This is the orientation through the allée, which is up there. All of the Doug firs are there. And our feeling is that when you stand here, you should be able to look right through the building and see through those magnificent trees that are there. We start out with lobby and reception, which is this space. And again, this is the size that would be required for those functions, including a small gift shop and things like that. Off to the side here is changing exhibits space, and we designate the changing exhibit space as a place that can be used kind of like this space is being used in off hours or for other functions, and it has direct access from the parking. So it becomes an independent, again, the fire station is over there, but we're here, and this allows this space to be used for meetings and other kinds of things beyond having changing exhibits in there. So a person comes in, the parking lot's down here, comes into the entrance, into the lobby, and this does have multiple choices. It isn't a lockstep walking through the exhibits kind of experience. So we have the lobby, and we have what we call the Great Hall, which is a space just beyond the lobby that act as a place where people can come and go and make choices about what they want to see and where they're going to go. Especially new visitors will want to go basically through the whole place. But after a while, you may want to come back and just go and look at the boats, or you may want to go and understand fish ecology. And this would be the case, especially with school groups that have come. They may choose a place to focus on their attention. But the way that Jan has laid out the exhibits goes this way. You come in, lobby reception. Of course, there's men and women restrooms immediately adjacent to that. We have the theater where that major river story is told. We have the McKenzie River Trail coming directly from the theater, the screen parts, and in fact, you come into this. This is a very dynamic and amazing experience. You come into the Tamlich lab area from there, and then you go over and see the boats, the historic boats, which are contained in this space. you cross over the Great Hall, and you go into another theater that's dealing with the story of the fish and fish ecology. So there's a theater, there's labs, the fish ecology, and then this is connected to the fish viewing and the stream profile that tells the story of the fish. And you can then come through here and go back out, basically go into the historic district, or you can come back down through the lobby and back out. And you have really free choice. It isn't a one-way trail, but you have free choice. You can go back and forth. There's a classroom off the lobby, and this is critical to the educational objectives of the facility. There's a research library. And then these kind of wider, pinker areas back here are mechanical, electrical systems, back of house and storage. And in this case over here, there's a back of house and storage and LSS, which is life support systems for the fish, the live fish exhibits, which are basically an aquarium. And what we did was we did basically two schemes. This scheme, you can see the outline of the drift boat, that kind of shape, and these are the ponds here. There's water here and water here. The view on this screen is much better because these are much bluer. It's not quite as saturated as it should be. So we did this scheme, which is the outline of the boat, and then we did another scheme. This is called the boathouse scheme, and then we did another scheme, which is the meander scheme. And we felt that what we wanted to introduce some of these ideas to you about how this building might be designed and how the architecture might relate to the storyline. This one is clearly about the boats, and then there's another scheme that we call the meander scheme, which is related to the geomorphology and tectonics of the site.
So we're going to go through, Bill has developed some three-dimensional models. So there's a series of slides of the site and sort of zooming in. We'll go through 3 or 4 or 5 of these for each of the options.
Right.
So this is the drift boat scheme. This is taking that site plan and just tilting it up three-dimensionally. So
again, you can see what, in this case now, we've taken those programmatic size bubbles and we've given them a third dimension. So these are the height of the required heights of the various spaces. You can see that main view corridor and alley connection is the central piece. This is the lobby, the Great Hall, the theater. Each of those is color-coded, so you can kind of relate them to the bubble diagram, coming back to fish ecology and viewing, and then the support spaces around the outside. And what we've done in this case is we've kind of clad the building in a boat-like structure. And again, these are all diagrammatic. This isn't real, but it gives a sense of how the building might be structured in the future. And there it is with the roof. So again, this kind of comes down to kind of understanding the thematic qualities of this building. We've got the parking area here, and what we've done is we've taken the oars and made them really large as elements that can frame the views into the space. This building is mostly, the idea is that this building is mostly about wood, because the buildings are about wood. There's the central structure that leads to the alley going that way, and various uses of wood that kind of tell the boat story. This is, we put a roof on this just to show kind of what the roof would be. This is really more what you would see on the inside of the building. The building might be a large structure with beams going across and a wood ceiling. This isn't a real building. This is a diagrammatic building that kind of shows materials and shows character. And then this is a view at the entrance. So this is the parking lot. We're looking, as I said earlier, we're looking straight through the building to the alley of the the Doug fir trees, which are framing that view. We've really paid attention to how that all works. These are those big oars that kind of say this is a boat building. And again, it's all about wood. So there's horizontal wood on the exterior of the building. There are slats that cover openings and windows and things like that. And you can still see the bubble diagrams back inside to kind of understand what the functions are behind the facade.
When we came in last night, quite late, we were looking for the Good Pasture Bridge. That's our icon to know that where to turn off on the highway. And you know, it's all lit up at night, and I commented to Bill after we were looking at these yesterday that that bridge is also a slat edge bridge, and so the light's sort of coming out between the slats. And I guess that was probably intuitive sort of comparison, but just again thinking about that there's a local building vernacular that approaches sort of building facade, the bridge facade, in kind of a similar fashion. So I won't go through re-describing the site, but we wanted to place each of these two building schemes within the site plan just to make sure how it all fits. And this was the meander scheme. There's still elements of the outline of the boat, particularly when you kind of zoom in, and you can see we still have this walkway around the building. But our approach to this was to really think about a building that was maybe more organic in shape, and think about a building that occupies, again, it's on the meander, but it's a more organic form inspired building.
Right, and so if you remember the meander, again, the large area that we're reconstituting the meander water in comes like this, and it sweeps through and out and goes down to the old fish ponds. And so what we've done is we've taken that shape, and we've said that this is, as Dennis said, is a more organic shape of building. It's that green outline there. And we've taken those same bubbles, and you can follow through and see them in the similar order, but rearranged in order to fit within a different envelope. And so we've got the lobby, the theater, McKenzie River Trail, Tamlich, boats, the great hall that connects these, fish ecology, the theater, the classroom is here, support spaces are arranged along the edges, as you can see. The fish viewing and stream profile, in this case, works very well because it's directly connected to the water that we've created. And the reason for doing two schemes is basically there's a myriad of schemes, millions of ways of doing building. And what we wanted to show you was that you can take some qualities of the site and some qualities of the storyline, and you can combine them into a building. And in this case, we've combined them into two buildings, two separate building schemes for you to understand the complexity and how the building might lay out in the future. So again, this element is identical in both of the schemes, which is the grand hall that goes and connects into the alley of Doug firs. And you can see the programmatic elements arranged around the in that same order that we talked about before. And in this case, instead of being wood, we've clad this in earth strata, and you'll see in the perspectives that these walls are layers of earth and tell that tectonic story. And then and also in this case, we've covered over the building with a cream roof, which is appropriate for this site.
And Bill, how do these buildings compare in terms of square footage and space?
They're identical.
They're identical. I have a question too.
Sure.
Does the meander scheme building also include these oars? I thought that was really excellent.
Yeah, it's kind of fun, isn't it? No, in fact, what we're trying to do is have two schemes that are two quite very different schemes, and they tell a different story. The boat scheme tells the building itself starts to tell the boat story, and in this case, the building tells the tectonic story of the McKenzie River and the strata that the river, and kind of metaphorically, this cuts through the strata just as the McKenzie River cut through, and you start to tell that tectonic story, which is important. So then you come to and you can see the strata of the land where the river has cut through. There's boulders and things on the outside. This is a totally different approach. The green roof kind of cascades over that, and this is more the story of the earth. And then the boat story is still told inside, but in this case it starts with the story of the river. Yes, sir.
You haven't said anything very much about restoring the fish ponds out in front of the house.
Yeah, well, in fact, that's one of the things. If you go back to the meander, so these.
It's inside your loop there, but there's nothing.
This is the restoration of those the fish ponds here. We've created some more water areas, and in fact, the meander. This is a flat area that we know at one time had water in it, and we would restore that to water, and then the pond here would be restored also. So there'd be quite a bit of water on the site with this scheme. And you can, again, I'm sorry this is kind of washed out, because you look at it on the screen, it's really bright, or the drawing on the wall, and you can look at that a little bit later. But there's really quite a bit of water restoration. That's the idea.
So you guys were right on cue. So in terms of our presentation, this is kind of the pause point. So we knew that I think Doug had to leave right at 10:30, so he made it to the end of sort of the design presentation. We'll open it up here for questions, as many as you have. And there is a couple follow-up pieces about kind of thinking about phasing and budgeting, but this would be a good chance also to stand up and if you want, and ask as many questions as you want, or maybe we should take a break.
Yeah, we got some good food back here. Let's try to eat it.
So we'll take a 5 or 10 minute break, and then we'll come back and take as many questions as you want.
And your question, I really appreciate your comments.